The silence in that living room didn't just feel cold. No kam giak nhu mot ban antuhing. I stood there, the weight of my unborn child feeling heavier with every second that passed. Outside, the Portland rain was turning into a gray, freezing drizzle, blurring the edges of the perfectly manicured lawn I grew up on. But inside? Inside, the air was crystal clear. Too clear. My mother, Patricia Vance, sat on her velvet armchair like a queen presiding over a fallen court. Her eyes, usually sharp enough to cut glass, were now frozen into 2 chips of blue ice. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at me, her only daughter, and uttered 5 words that shattered 28 years of history in a single heartbeat. "You're dead to me, Elena." No hesitation, no tremor in her voice. Just a cold, calculated disposal. In that moment, I wasn't a person to her anymore. I was a failed investment. I sat there for exactly 3 seconds, 1 for the shock, 1 for the heartbreak, and 1 for the realization that the woman in front of me was a stranger. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Instead, I reached into my purse, my fingers trembling only slightly, and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. I placed it on the mahogany coffee table right next to her vintage crystal coaster. "Merry Christmas, Mother," I whispered. As I walked out of that house for what I knew would be the last time, I heard the heavy oak door click shut behind me. It sounded like a coffin closing, but what my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the contents of that innocent-looking box were about to ignite a fire that would burn the Vance legacy to the ground. You see, in my family, secrets are the currency we trade in, and I was about to go bankrupt. Before I tell you what was in that box and how it led to a 20-minute screaming fit that brought the police to our doorstep, I need to take you back, because to understand why a mother would disown her child on Christmas morning, you have to understand the golden cage I was born into. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever had a moment where you realized your family's love came with a price tag? Drop your story in the comments. I'm reading all of them. And if you believe that blood shouldn't be an excuse for toxicity, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends. I am a Vance. In Portland, Oregon, that name used to mean something. My grandfather didn't just sell lumber, he built the foundations of this city in the 1950s. We were old money, not the flash-your-cash, gold-plated Lamborghini kind of wealth, but the quiet, terrifying kind. The kind that sits in boardrooms and decides which neighborhoods get renovated and which ones get forgotten. Growing up in the Vance mansion was like living in a museum. You could look, but you couldn't touch. Everything had a place and everyone had a role. My father, Richard, was the stoic face of the company. My younger brother Michael was the golden heir who could do no wrong, even when he was doing absolutely nothing. And my mother? Patricia was the architect of our public image. To her, life was a series of curated photographs. Every charity luncheon, every country club gala, every Sunday brunch was a performance. I was the perfect daughter. I was supposed to attend an Ivy League school, and marry a neurosurgeon or a high-priced litigator, and produce a new generation of Vances to keep the cycle going. But I had a flaw. I had a heart that didn't beat for spreadsheets or social standing. When I told my mother I wanted to be a nurse, she looked at me as if I'd suggested becoming a street sweeper. "Elena, darling," she'd said, swirling her Chardonnay, "nursing is a noble hobby for people who need the money. You don't need money, you need a legacy." I went to nursing school anyway. I wanted to feel something real. I wanted to help people who weren't just worried about their stock portfolios, and that's how I met David. It was a rainy Tuesday at St. Mary's Hospital, the kind of day where the emergency room feels like a revolving door of misery. David Martinez came in after a minor motorcycle slide. He had road rash down his left arm and a grin that suggested he'd enjoyed the fall. He was everything a Vance wasn't. He had tattoos creeping up his neck, artistic, intricate designs that told a story. He had long dark hair tied back, a leather jacket that smelled like gasoline and rain, and an energy that made the sterile hospital room feel alive. While I cleaned his wounds, he didn't complain. He cracked jokes. He asked me about my day. He looked at me, not at my last name, not at my expensive watch, but at me. "You're too good at this," he'd said, wincing as I applied the antiseptic. "You have healing hands, Elena. Most people just have job hands." That was the moment. The first time someone saw my career as a calling rather than a disappointment. David was a tattoo artist. To my mother, that was synonymous with criminal. But to me, he was a creator. He came from a working-class Mexican-American family where love was loud, messy, and unconditional. When he finally asked me out for coffee, I knew I was crossing a line. I just didn't realize that line was a tripwire for a landmine. The first time I brought David home for Sunday dinner, I might as well have brought a hand grenade. The dining room was set with the good china, the stuff that cost more than David's motorcycle. My father was hiding behind the financial section, and Michael was smirking, already sensing the blood in the water. Patricia didn't even stand up to greet him. She just sat there, her eyes scanning David like a TSA agent looking for contraband. "So, Mr. Martinez," she began, her voice dripping with artificial honey, "Elena tells us you're an artist. Tell me, what is the long-term growth potential for ink on skin?" David handled it with more grace than I ever could. He talked about his dream of opening his own shop, about the history of the art form, about the steady income he was building, but I could see my mother's mind closing like a vault. "It's a charming phase, Elena," she whispered to me in the kitchen later, while I was rinsing the crystal. "But eventually, the thrill of the bad boy wears off. And then what? Will he pay for the private schools? Will he host the fundraisers? You're playing a dangerous game with your future." I told her I loved him. She told me I was confused. The tension didn't break, it just tightened. Every phone call, every visit was a psychological war. My brother Michael, who had never worked a day in his life and lived on a stipend from my parents, would make snide comments about David's street background. They were waiting for me to fail. They were waiting for David to prove them right. But David did the opposite. He worked harder. He saved every penny. And 6 months ago, in the middle of a messy kitchen while we were making tacos, he got down on one knee. The ring wasn't a 5-carat diamond from Tiffany's. It was a custom-designed band he'd spent weeks working on with a local jeweler. It had a small, brilliant sapphire, the color of the Oregon sky. It was perfect. When I called my parents to tell them, the silence lasted 10 seconds. And then my mother spoke. "I hope you've drafted a prenuptial agreement, Elena, because Vance does not subsidize a tattoo parlor." That should have been my warning. But then, the real storm hit. I found out I was pregnant. I thought, naively, that a baby would change things. I thought the prospect of a grandchild would finally melt the ice in Patricia's heart. I thought Christmas morning would be the beginning of a new chapter for the Vance family. I was right about one thing. It was a new chapter. I just didn't realize it was the final one. While my own home felt like a curated exhibit in a museum, David's world was a riot of color and noise. The first time he took me to his parents' house in Southeast Portland, I nearly had a panic attack in the driveway. I was wearing a silk blouse and pearls, the Vance armor. I expected a polite interrogation. I expected to be judged for my pedigree. Instead, the door flew open before we even reached the porch. "Elena! Finally!" Maria, David's mother, didn't shake my hand. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon, toasted corn, and genuine affection. In the Vance household, physical contact was reserved for stiff handshakes or air kisses, but Maria held me like she'd known me for 20 years. The house was small, certainly smaller than our guest cottage, but it was alive. Then there was music playing in the kitchen, some old bolero song that David's father, Carlos, was humming along to while he prepped carnitas. There were photos everywhere. Not professional portraits, but blurry, laughing snapshots of birthdays, graduations, and backyard barbecues. "Eat, eat," Carlos insisted, piling my plate high. He didn't ask about my career prospects. He didn't ask if David was a good financial match. He asked if I was happy. He asked what made me laugh. That night, as I sat on their mismatched sofa watching David argue playfully with his sister Rosa about a movie, I felt a sharp, stinging pain in my chest. It was grief. I was grieving for the childhood I never had. I realized that for 28 years I had been starved of this messy, loud, unpretentious love. I looked at David and he squeezed my hand. He knew. He knew that every minute I spent here made it harder to go back to the mausoleum on the hill. #pattern, interrupt, the price of defiance. But the higher I climbed into David's world, the lower I sank in my mother's eyes. After we got engaged, the Vance treatment shifted from subtle disapproval to active sabotage. My mother stopped calling me to talk. She called me to consult. "Elena," she'd say, her voice as sharp as a scalpel over the phone. "I've spoken to the family attorney. We're updating the trust. It's for your own protection, of course. We can't have the Vance timber legacy being liquidated to pay for, what was it, a tattoo shop in a gentrified neighborhood?" I told her I didn't want the money. I told her I had my nursing salary. She laughed, a cold, tinkling sound. "Darling, you have a salary. And I have a lifestyle. You'll find that love is a very poor substitute for a heated pool and a private security detail when things get difficult." And then, things got difficult in the most beautiful way possible. The morning I saw those 2 pink lines on the test, I was terrified. Not because of the baby. David and I had already started talking about names, but because I knew this was the point of no return. A marriage could be annulled. A phase could end. But a child? A child was a permanent stain on Patricia Vance's carefully bleached tapestry. David was over the moon. He cried. He actually sat on the floor of our small apartment and cried, thanking me for the greatest gift he'd ever receive. He spent the whole day researching the best prenatal vitamins and talking to my stomach as if our daughter could already hear him. But when I looked in the mirror, all I could think about was Christmas. 2 weeks before the holiday, my mother called with an ultimatum. "We are hosting the annual Christmas morning brunch," she stated, not inviting, but commanding. "The club president will be there. The senator's wife will be there. You will attend, Elena, and you will attend alone. David is my husband, Mother. David is an employee of a service industry," she snapped. "He doesn't belong at this table. If you want to remain a part of this family, if you want your future to be secure, you will show up. You will be the daughter I raised, and we will forget this little rebellion ever happened." I looked at David, who was in the corner of our living room, assembling a secondhand crib he'd found and spent days refinishing. He looked up and mouthed, "It's okay, go, and see them one last time." He was so selfless. He thought I was going there to make peace. He thought that maybe, just maybe, the news of a grandchild would perform a miracle. But I knew my mother. Patricia didn't believe in miracles. She believed in leverage. I spent the next week preparing. I bought a gift, a small box wrapped in silver paper with a white velvet ribbon. I spent hours writing a note. I practiced my breathing. I wasn't going there to beg for her approval anymore. I was going there to give her one last chance to be a human being. On Christmas morning, the rain was relentless. It felt like the sky was mourning something. I drove up the long, winding driveway of the Vance estate, past the stone lions and the frosted hedges. The house looked like a postcard, perfect, silent, and dead. I walked in, the smell of expensive pine and beeswax hitting me like a wall. My brother Michael was already there, slumped on the sofa, nursing a mimosa and staring at his phone. My father was a shadow in the corner. And there she was, Patricia Vance, dressed in Chanel, holding a glass of vintage champagne, looking at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You look substantial, Elena," she said, her eyes lingering on my coat, which couldn't quite hide the curve of my belly. "I'm pregnant, Mother. David and I are having a baby." I waited. For a second, I actually hoped. I hoped she would put the glass down. I hoped she would hug me like Maria did. I hoped she would see her daughter instead of her reputation. But the silence stretched and stretched until it snapped. "I don't want you or that bastard in this family," she said. And that's when I realized the golden cage didn't just keep me in, it kept the world out, and I was finally ready to break the bars. While I was working double shifts at St. Mary's, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and exhaustion to pay for my own life, my brother Michael was living a life of leisure that would make a Roman emperor blush. Michael is 3 years younger than me, but in my mother's eyes he is the second coming. He hasn't held a job for more than 6 months in his entire 25 years of existence. His career consists of networking at the country club and investing in high-end gaming rigs. He still lives in the daylight basement of the Vance mansion, a space larger than my entire apartment, and has his laundry done by a professional service paid for by my father. The hypocrisy was suffocating. I remember a Tuesday evening, just weeks before that fateful Christmas, when Michael called me. "Hey, Elle," he said, his voice thick with the boredom of someone who hasn't done anything productive all day. "Mom's losing it again. She saw a post of you and... what's his name? The ink guy? At a food truck in SE Portland. She says you're slumming it and it's making the family look desperate. Maybe just, I don't know, stop posting for a while? It makes it harder for me to ask Dad for that new car if you're out there looking like a revolutionary." I sat on the edge of my bed, my feet aching from 12 hours on the hospital floor, and felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. "Michael, I'm living my life. I'm a nurse. I'm married. I'm literally saving lives while you're worrying about the upholstery in a car you didn't earn." Yeah, he sighed. "Just saying. You're the one making waves. I'm just trying to keep the peace." That was the Vance motto. Keep the peace, no matter how much of your soul you have to sell to do it. Then came the concerned friends phase. My mother didn't just attack me directly, she weaponized her social circle. I started getting messages from women I hadn't spoken to since high school. "Elena, dear, your mother mentioned you're going through a bit of a rebellious streak. We all had them. But don't you think it's time to come home? There's a lovely opening at your father's firm in the PR department. No more messy hospital shifts." They saw my life, a life built on merit and love, as a streak, a temporary insanity. Patricia even went as far as to visit David's tattoo shop. She didn't go in, of course. She parked her black SUV across the street and sat there for an hour, just watching. And David told me about it later. He said he went out to offer her water, and she just rolled up the window and drove away. The psychological warfare was designed to make me feel small, to make me feel like without the Vance name, I was nothing. But they forgot one thing. I had spent years watching people die and babies being born. I knew what real value looked like, and it didn't look like a black SUV or a PR job. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't tell them right away. David and I kept it as our sacred secret for a month. We celebrated with Maria and Carlos first. We had a small dinner where Maria cried into the tamales and Carlos started planning how to grandchild-proof his motorcycle. But as Christmas approached, I knew the secret needed to be shared. Not because I wanted their blessing, I knew I wouldn't get it, but because I needed to close the door. I spent a whole afternoon in my apartment preparing that silver box. David watched me from the doorway, his expression worried. "Are you sure you want to do this, Becca?" he asked. "You don't owe them a thing. We can stay here. We can have our own Christmas." "I know," I said, tying the white velvet ribbon into a perfect clinical knot. "But they need to see what they're throwing away. My mother thinks she's cutting me out of her will. She doesn't realize she's cutting herself out of a legacy she can't buy with timber money." Inside that box, I placed the first ultrasound photo. It was grainy, black and white, showing a tiny flickering heartbeat. To anyone else, it was a miracle. To my mother, I knew it would be a weapon. I wrote the note. My handwriting was steady. I didn't use "Dear Mother." I didn't sign it with "Love." I just wrote the truth. "This is the grandchild you'll never know. Merry Christmas from the family you rejected." The morning of December 25th was a ghost of a day. The fog was so thick in Portland you could barely see the streetlights. I kissed David goodbye, feeling the kick of the baby against my palm. "I'll be back in an hour," I promised. Driving up to the Heights felt like driving into a different century. The houses became larger, the gates more ornate, the atmosphere more sterile. When I stepped into that living room and saw the three of them, Patricia in her armor of silk, Richard behind his paper, and Michael in his apathy. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I delivered the news. I watched the disgust wash over my mother's face. I heard the word bastard fall from her lips like a curse. And then, I did it. I placed the box on the table. I walked out of that house with my head held high, the cold rain hitting my face like a baptism. I felt light. I felt free. I didn't look back at the mansion. I didn't look back at the lions. I drove straight to the hospital parking lot, the place where David and I met, and I just sat there, waiting. I knew the clock was ticking. I knew that in a few minutes that silver ribbon would be pulled, that lid would be lifted, and the scream that was about to echo through the Vance mansion would be the loudest thing they had ever heard. 3 hours and 14 minutes. That's how long it took for the world to explode. 3 hours and 14 minutes. That's how long the silence lasted. I spent those hours sitting in my car, the engine off, watching the rain streak down the windshield of the St. Mary's parking lot. It's funny how, in the movies, when your life falls apart, there's usually a dramatic soundtrack. But for me, it was just the rhythmic thump-thump of my own heart and the distant sound of an ambulance siren. I was waiting for the explosion. I knew my mother. I knew that silver box was a ticking time bomb. And at exactly 3:14 p.m., my phone vibrated so hard it nearly fell off the dashboard. It was Michael. My golden boy brother, who usually couldn't be bothered to text me back for 3 days, was calling me with a desperation I had never heard before. I let it ring for 3 beats, then 4. On the 5th, I swiped accept. Elena? Elena. What the hell did you do? His voice was shaking. Behind him, I could hear a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a high-pitched, rhythmic wailing, a sound that didn't even seem human. It was my mother. I didn't do anything, Michael, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. I just gave her a Christmas present. Did she like it? She's been screaming for 20 minutes straight, Elena. Dad had to call 911 because he thought she was having a stroke. The neighbors are out on their porches. She won't stop saying, the baby over and over again. She's staring at that photo like it's a demon. What were you thinking? I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. I could picture it. The pristine living room, the expensive champagne forgotten, and Patricia Vance, the woman who never had a hair out of place, losing her mind over a grainy ultrasound of the bastard she had just disowned. She called my child a bastard, Michael, I whispered. She told me I was dead to her. She wanted me out of the will, right? Well, I'm out. But that photo? That's the only part of my daughter she'll ever see. Tell her I said, you're welcome. I hung up. I turned off my phone, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could actually breathe. The air in that hospital parking lot felt sweeter than any air in the Vance mansion. I drove home to David, to our small, messy, beautiful apartment, and I didn't look back. The next few months were a masterclass in the silence of the Vances. They didn't call. They didn't apologize. Instead, they did what they always did. They tried to erase me. My mother sent a formal letter via their family attorney, stating that my access to the family trust had been voluntarily terminated and that I was to return my emergency key to the estate. I sent the key back in an envelope with a single diaper coupon inside. No note, just a reminder of what was coming. But while the Vances were busy protecting their ego, David and I were busy building an empire. You see, my mother's biggest mistake was assuming that without her money, we would starve. She underestimated David's talent and my grit. David's tattoo shop, The Ink Line, became a Portland sensation. He wasn't just a bad boy on a bike anymore. He was an artist. He was featured in Portland Monthly. People were flying in from Seattle and LA just to get his custom black and gray realism work. Suddenly, the employee of the service industry was making more in a month than my brother Michael invested in a year. And then, Lily Rose arrived. She came into the world 3 days before her due date, screaming just as loudly as my mother had, but for a very different reason. Lily Rose Martinez Vance. When David held her for the first time, I saw a man who had never known his own father, promising a tiny, 7-pound human that she would never, ever have to earn his love. "She has your stubborn chin, Elle," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "And your heart," I replied. We didn't send an announcement to the Vance mansion. We didn't need to. We had Maria and Carlos. We had a hospital room full of nurses I worked with, who brought handmade blankets and enough food to feed a small army. This was my chosen family. But as Lily grew, as she started to crawl, then walk, then speak her first words, the ghosts of the past started to catch up. It started with the private investigator. I noticed a silver sedan parked near our new house, the house we bought with David's success and my promotion to charge nurse. It followed me to the park. It followed me to the grocery store. My mother wasn't just disowning me. She was stalking us. She was obsessed with the grandchild she had cursed. Michael told me later that she had a scrapbook. A secret grandma book filled with long lens photos of Lily at the playground. It was chilling. But the real bomb dropped when Lily was 8 months old. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I opened it to find Michael. He looked like a different person. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his face was gaunt, and he smelled like stale cigarettes and regret. But when he saw Lily playing on the rug with her blocks, he broke. He actually fell to his knees and started sobbing. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't let him in. I stood in the doorway, my heart hardening. "What do you want, Michael? Did Mom send you to take more pictures?" "No," he gasped, wiping his eyes. "Mom and Dad are getting a divorce. It's over, Elle. The whole thing is falling apart." That was the first shock. But the second one was the one that changed everything. "Dad found out about the money," Michael whispered. "What money?" "The money Mom's been giving me for 2 years. While you were working double shifts to pay for your wedding and your nursing exams, she was funneling money into a secret account for me, $43,000. Elena. I felt the blood drain from my face. $43,000. My mother, who had lectured me about financial responsibility, who had threatened to cut me off if I married David because he wasn't stable, who had made me feel like a beggar for wanting to pursue my dream of nursing, had been secretly bankrolling Michael's laziness. "She lied to Dad," Michael continued, his voice trembling. "She told him it was for household repairs and charity donations, but she was paying my rent, my car, my debts. She was buying my silence so I'd stay the golden boy while you were the disappointment." The irony was a physical weight in my chest. She hadn't rejected me because David was poor. She rejected me because she couldn't control me. She needed Michael to be a failure so she could feel like a savior. And she needed me to be a failure so she could feel like a judge. "Why are you telling me this now, Michael?" I asked, my voice cold. "Because Dad left," he said. "He moved out. He's taking half the estate. Mom has to sell the house. And she's losing her mind, Elena. She thinks if she can just get Lily, if she can just save the baby from your life, everything will be okay again. She's talking about lawyers. She's talking about grandparents' rights." I looked at my daughter, laughing as she knocked over her tower of blocks. "Let her try," I said. "I'm not that scared little girl in the silk blouse anymore. And this isn't a museum. It's a home. They say that when an empire falls, it doesn't go out with a bang. It goes out with a whimper, but in the case of the Vance family, it went out with a process server standing on my front porch holding a stack of legal documents. 2 weeks after Michael's confession about the $43,000, my mother launched her final assault. She didn't call. She didn't apologize. She sued us. Grandparents' rights. Those were the words printed at the top of the petition. Patricia Vance, the woman who had called my daughter a bastard and told me I was dead to her, was now claiming that denying her access to her grandchild would cause Lily Rose irreparable emotional harm. The irony was so thick I could taste it, but as I stood there in my nursing scrubs, holding those papers while David stood behind me, his hand protective on my shoulder, I didn't feel the fear I used to feel. I didn't feel like the disappointment anymore. I felt like a mother lion, and Patricia Vance was about to realize that you can't buy a relationship with a child you've already cursed. The next month was a blur of consultations and courtrooms. My mother had hired the most expensive family law firm in Oregon, the kind of lawyers who charge $800 an hour just to breathe. They tried every trick in the book. They dug into David's past, trying to use his tattoo artist lifestyle as evidence of an unstable home. They brought up my estrangement from my family as proof of my supposed mental instability, but they forgot one thing. We had receipts. I sat in my lawyer's office, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah who specialized in high-conflict family cases. I handed her the folder. "This is everything," I said. Inside was the recording of the 911 call from Christmas morning, the one where my father admitted my mother was having a breakdown over an ultrasound. There were the reports from the private investigator Michael had told me about, proving she had been stalking us for months, and most importantly, we had Michael. My brother, the golden child, did something I never thought he'd be capable of. He agreed to testify against her. "I can't keep living the lie, Elle," he told me over coffee a week before the hearing. "The money, the secrets, it's all poison. I want Lily to know a real uncle, not a puppet." The day of the hearing was gray and drizzly, typical Portland. My mother showed up in a navy suit, her hair perfect, her face a mask of dignified grief. She played the part of the long-suffering grandmother perfectly. Until my lawyer started speaking. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "The petitioner claims she wants a relationship with this child, yet on December 25th, she referred to this child as a bastard. We have the witness testimony of the child's own uncle and father. We have evidence of a $43,000 secret fund used to manipulate family dynamics, and we have proof of unauthorized surveillance of a minor." I watched my mother's face. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. She looked at Michael, her golden boy, as he took the stand and told the truth about her obsession and her control. The judge didn't take long to decide. "Grandparents' rights are not a weapon to be used by those who have already severed family ties," the judge stated, looking directly at my mother. "The court finds no evidence that a relationship with the petitioner is in the best interest of the child. In fact, given the history of emotional volatility and stalking, I am granting the respondent's request for a permanent restraining order." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. 3 months later, the for sale sign went up in front of the Vance mansion. The divorce was finalized, and because of the financial discrepancies my father discovered, the $43,000 being just the tip of the iceberg, my mother was forced to sell the estate to pay the settlement. The golden cage was being sold to a tech developer who planned to turn the grounds into a sustainable co-housing community. My mother hated the idea. To her, it was the ultimate desecration. She moved into a high-rise condo downtown, alone. No more garden parties, no more status. Just her and her scrapbooks of a family that no longer existed for her. My father reached out once more, a month after the mansion sold. He sent a letter asking if we could meet for lunch. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the man who hid behind his newspaper while I was being disowned. I thought about the man who only grew a backbone when his money was being stolen, not when his daughter was being hurt. I wrote back a short note. "I hope you find peace, Dad. But Lily doesn't need a grandfather who only shows up when the house is empty. Maybe in a few years we can talk. But for now, we're full." Lily's first birthday was a celebration of everything we had built. We didn't host it at a country club. We held it in our backyard. So under the string lights David had hung between the apple trees. Maria and Carlos were there, teaching Lily how to clap her hands. Rosa was running around with a bubble machine, and Michael was there, looking healthier and happier than I'd ever seen him, helping David grill burgers. As I watched Lily faceplant into her smash cake, covered in pink frosting and pure joy, I realized that the Christmas miracle didn't happen on December 25th. It happened every day since. It happened when David held my hair while I was sick. It happened when my fellow nurses covered my shifts so I could go to court. It happened when I finally stopped looking for approval in a mirror that was designed to make me feel small. Walking away from that mansion wasn't a tragedy. It was an escape. If you're out there today, feeling trapped by the expectations of a toxic family, let me tell you something. The will they threaten to cut you out of? It's just paper. The reputation they're so scared of losing? It's just ego. Your real inheritance isn't money or timber or a last name. It's the peace you feel when you finally close the door on people who only love the version of you they can control. Choose yourself. Choose your peace. And eventually you'll find the family that chooses you back every single day with no conditions and no price tags. Merry Christmas to the family I chose. And to the one I left behind? Thank you for the gift of my freedom. Don't forget to share your story in the comments. If you've ever had to walk away to find yourself, you're not alone. Like and subscribe for more stories of resilience. I'll see you in the next one.